Hello, and welcome to all the truth seekers that have joined us today from around the world. I'm glad that you've decided to join this online community. For the next hour, GMDC will help you uncover new ideas that will push your thinking inside and outside of your business. My name is Mark McKelsey, and I lead the people and the projects that bring you insights, shopper trends, and next practices from Global Market Development Center. This Infocast will make your lunch hour profitable by demonstrating just how the curiosity and the power of the consumer must be at the center of your strategy. In other words, the way you've done things in the past is not the way your future success will happen. Retailers and brands more than ever must be adaptive and in constant flux in order to connect with evolving populations. So, how you respond to this session is important. Without further ado, let's jump into it. I'm coming to you live from Colorado Springs and have Nicola Smith joining me from Rebel and Reason in Atlanta. Today's Infocast is going to help you find the so what behind various omni-channel strategies if you're looking to transform traditional brick and mortar into an endless aisle. The customer journey has changed right before retailers' eyes. There's no doubt about that. In the past, companies controlled how, when, and where customers interacted with them. Now the tables have turned and customers are dictating how that relationship actually develops. Driven largely by the ubiquity of mobile, the growth of big data and advancements in both IoT and AI, customers now expect a seamless and consistent brand experience regardless of where, when, or how they buy. For brands, this shift requires a holistic, integrated approach focused on creating frictionless customer experiences across both digital and physical touchpoints. It's no longer relevant to look at the customer path to purchase by channel separately because shoppers just aren't using one channel to interact with brands or products anymore. As technology makes our world smaller, the competitive landscape becomes bigger. The stores that used to be across the street from each other are now fighting for dollars with those who are across the country and even across the ocean. That means a poor customer experience in any channel is a very costly mistake. With that said, Nicola, welcome. Would you help our viewers know more about what they can expect to learn today?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to share all of this information with your amazing audience. Today, we're really going to focus on gaining a better understanding of consumer expectation around omnichannel, reviewing some of the best-in-class examples of brands that have started to connect the dots, get a glimpse of what might be coming next as we look at omnichannel and how it's integrating with emerging technologies like AI, chatbots, augmented reality, and the Internet of Things. And you'll learn how to actually start connecting the dots for your own brand.
Sounds great. I'm looking forward to it. Before we get started and dive in, I'd like to remind our viewers that we can take questions during or after the session by using the Q&A button at the top of your screen. We'll get to those at the end of the hour. So let's get started. Back over to you, Nicola.
Okay, wonderful. We're going to jump right in here. Make sure everybody can see. Okay. Hopefully everybody is seeing my screen now.
Nicola, it's on presenter view right now. If you can go full screen.
There we go. All right.
Looks
Perfect.
Great. Thank you.
Okay. Well, my name is Nicola Smith, and I'm the CEO and founder of Rebel and Reason. We are a marketing, branding, and innovation strategy and consulting company here in Atlanta, Georgia. And I'm really excited to speak to you today about how to connect the dots in an omni-channel world, because as Mark mentioned, this is really becoming a priority for consumers and is something that brands need to not just be thinking about, but starting to experiment with and actually implement on a large scale. So when I started to think about this topic, I really focused on this concept of connecting the dots because looking back in history, this terminology of connecting the dots has really come about from something that we all probably did as kids. I'm sure most of you have some experience with doing a connect the dots drawing. And what was amazing to me as a child is that when you started to connect the dots, this image would almost magically appear on the page. And the same is true as we think about connecting the dots in Omni-Channel. It really does give us a better view into our consumer and our end customer. It starts to help us understand our brand in a more nuanced way, and often gives us the tools to start implementing strategies that really do drive business forward. When we talk about Omni-Channel and connecting the dots, what I often find is that people have a misunderstanding of the terminology that's being used. And so I wanted to just touch on that a little bit today to make sure that we all have the same foundational understanding of what we're talking about. So if you start out thinking about single channel marketing, it really is thinking about the experience of a consumer through those individual channels and touch points. Most brands, I would say today, are either multi-channel or cross-channel marketers, where they have multiple channels that the brand may be active in. Usually those channels are being run in a siloed fashion, or they're not fully integrated. But it does give the brand a single view of the customer if you're really playing with cross-channel, and allows you to start to connect the dots. Where Omni-Channel takes it is really to the next level, where the participant experiences a brand and not just a single channel within the brand environment. And on the brand side, you're able to actually leverage that single view of the consumer or participant in really strategic and coordinated ways across multiple channels within your marketing mix and elements that may interact with customer service. So if we really think about it, multi-channel marketing means that your brand is present on all of the key channels. That's both traditional and digital. And omni-channel is really about requiring those different platforms or channels integrate with each other so that you're creating a fully immersive channel agnostic experience for the consumer. For brands, what this means is that the customer may experience your brand through multiple channels. They may take multiple consumer journeys to get there, but they are experiencing a single brand, and the experience itself is really consistent across these different channels. And I love this quote from Christina Dern over at Square. A great omni-channel experience feels familiar to the customer, regardless of the channel. Inject your brand's voice into every communication and be consistent with pricing policies, offers, and rules so that potential buyers don't get confused. And this is really important, again, as we think about the way marketing has often been structured. It is very siloed. What this requires is actually integration of these different silos across the organization so that a consumer can have that consistent experience. I think many of us have probably had the personal experience of seeing an offer either online or in the real world, and then looking for ways to maybe use that offer in a different channel and basically being told that it's not valid. So this system basically requires that we connect those dots in order to have that consistent experience. When we think about this for brands, what we're really talking about when we talk about omni-channel is giving the brand a single view of the customer, really having an integrated data set, again, across these multiple channels, and being able to create a seamless experience across channels and touch points for the consumer. And the reason this is so important is because consumer and market expectations are being set outside of your industry. I tell my clients this on a regular basis. Consumers are not just looking at your competitive set to base their expectations about your brand category or vertical. And so it's really important that you start to look outside of your own vertical in order to understand what consumer expectations might be across the broader retail industry. And the reality is, when we look at consumer behavior, consumers have already embraced seamlessly buying across multiple channels. There's actually a bunch of really amazing data on this, when we look at it, you can see that how consumers are really blending online and offline shopping. So we find that about 21% of people are actually researching in store and then purchasing in store, but a far greater number are blending various online and offline channels before making a purchasing decision. So 43% will research online and then purchase online. 22% will research online but then visit the physical store to purchase. 7% will visit the store first and then purchase online. And 7% will research online and in store before they go back to their computer or their mobile device to purchase online. So really interesting ways that we're seeing consumers are already there. They're already shopping in an omni-channel fashion, and it really is up to us as brands and marketers to catch up to where consumer expectation already is. The challenge is that while many brands have now acknowledged the expectation around omni-channel, they are still sorely lacking in actually delivering against specific omni-channel capabilities, specifically when we look in the retail sector. So I'm not going to go through each and every one of these stats, but what I think is good news for the sector and for the industry as a whole is that majority of brands are expecting to have almost full capability across a spectrum of these expectations by 2021. So brands are rapidly starting to build these capabilities across the organization. And again, if this is not something that you and your company or your team are already exploring or testing, I'd highly recommend baking this into your 2019 planning because consumer expectation is only going to continue to increase in relation to omni-channel. When we look at omni-channel, there's also really tangible value. We find that omni-channel shoppers spend about 50% more than single-channel shoppers. So there is direct impact to your revenue if you are starting to implement an omni-channel strategy. We also find that omni-channel shoppers have a 30% higher lifetime value because they're using multiple channels to connect with a brand. So there is tangible value, not just in regards to immediate sales, but also thinking long-term and the relationship with your consumer. Omni-channel has a real impact there as well. But while brands are acknowledging the value of omni-channel, what's interesting is while they may be implementing some sort of omni-channel strategy, very rarely do they actually have company leadership at the helm of these initiatives. So 64% of retailers have an omni-channel strategy, but only a fraction of them have leadership, senior leadership, actually driving it. And to me, this is a massive disconnect because omni-channel is not just a marketing strategy. It really requires that you break down organizational silos and start to connect the dots within your own company in order to make omni-channel work and to be able to implement it at a really tactical level. When we look at omni-channel, we also find that it doesn't just work when we're talking about B2C relationships, but about 56% of B2B executives have tried or started to experiment with omni-channel strategies in that B2B world as well. So as we think about omni-channel, again, it is not just even about the retail sector, but goes much broader than that and really is about a foundational shift in the way that we do business and think about our consumer. The good news is omni-channel is continuing to grow. About 43% of US marketers will invest more in omni-channel this year. And it'll be really interesting to see what happens as we move into 2019, because we anticipate additional spending against omni-channel capabilities moving forward. So now I want to talk a little bit about how we actually go about starting to connect the dots when we think about omni-channel strategy. And what's interesting when we look at omni-channel is that regardless of what your specific business or organizational goals may be, because those are going to differ by department, by team, they may differ by the specific vertical you're in or the type of products that you're selling. But when we think about omni-channel, our goals actually should be pretty static across all of those variables. So our goal when we're looking at Omni-Channel is really to create seamless, simple, personalized, consistent experiences for consumers. And if these 4 elements are not your primary goal with Omni-Channel, then you're really going to miss the mark. Because whatever your business goals may be, you will not be able to achieve them with Omni-Channel if you don't make these 4 elements a priority. When we look at the type of objectives you can really start to address through Omni-Channel, again, those are going to vary depending on what you're trying to do. But some of the objectives you may look at will be things like developing a single view of the customer and thinking through all of the ways you can then utilize that single view across your marketing mix. Developing a single view of the product or brand, so really starting to get a better sense of how people are engaging with your product or brand and where those opportunities might be. Enhancing the in-store shopping experience, enhancing the web and mobile shopping experience. So really thinking of this as an input into how you start to craft or iterate on those experiences in the future. Creating a channel agnostic order management process and approach. So again, Omni-Channel is much broader than just marketing. It taps into logistics and distribution. It taps into your customer service team and function. So but it really is something that goes beyond the marketing piece. And this channel agnostic order management is something that I think is going to be imperative for retail brands moving into 2019. And then it also will give you real-time insights. So this is the type of data that we've been talking about for a long time on the marketing side, but because Omni-Channel actually requires you to connect all of your data sets, you should be getting much more robust real-time insights. And then lastly, some of the objectives we may look at is really being able to think about our Omni-Channel strategy and components as being scalable and flexible. And that's important because if Omni-Channel is going to work not just for the marketing channels we have today, but for those that we may want to plug in and integrate in the future, you have to start to build your Omni-Channel strategy with scalability and flexibility in mind from the onset. As I've mentioned a couple of times, Omni-Channel marketing is really about organizational restructuring and really focused on this idea of omnifunctional collaboration. So the reason we have to think this way is because we have to think across the organization and across all of those other components that may not be within the direct purview of your marketing department. So the pieces that we want to think about as we think about how we optimize our organizational structure is how we're going to integrate our teams and technologies. You want to be able to really focus on and have a strategic North Star and business goals that are actually aligned across functions and departments. Often what I find, especially when working with bigger brands, is you will have different departments or teams that actually have goals that cannibalize each other or pull the organization in different directions. And so having that strategic North Star as a business that can be aligned across functions and departments is extraordinarily important as we think about Omni-Channel. We also want to make sure that we have one brand experience with consistent brand messaging, which again necessitates integrated teams and technologies and having that North Star in place that we can always use as a mechanism of testing whether or not we're going in the right direction. And then lastly, you really want to think about being customer-centric and customer-led. So not just putting the customer in the center of everything you're doing, but really thinking about how they're going to lead you forward. So when we talk about customer-led marketing, what we really mean is allowing the customer behavior to determine how you as a brand interact with them. So if someone is not communicating with you or engaging with you on Twitter, for example, that may not be a place to even run targeted advertising to reach them if they're choosing not to engage with your brand in that space. And again, it requires a shift in the way that companies think about their consumer and a shift in the way that they actually structure their organizations and teams. When we look at customer-led brands, what we find is that overwhelmingly, they are very responsive to their customers. Again, being customer-led really requires that we engage when and where our customers want. These brands are often very transparent. They are overt about what they're doing. They give customers a view into why certain business decisions are being made or into how a product is getting made. And transparency is really key when thinking about being a customer-led brand. And then lastly, again, they connect with customers in ways that they, the customer, actually initiates, not just in ways that the brand thinks will work for them. So why am I talking about being customer-led? Well, it's really because in reality, customers do not care about your internal structure. They don't care about your internal politics or your silos. They don't care about different lines of business or the fact that you may have separate budgets. They have expectations of having a singular experience with your brand. And as marketers, it really is our responsibility to connect those dots on the back end so that they have that seamless experience, regardless of which touch points they choose to engage with you through. And that really leads me to the next element of creating your omni-channel engagement strategy is to start off by doing a touch point audit. What you want to do is look at the different touch points across your brand and really think about where and when consumers might be engaging with these different touch points and channels. You want to include all of your digital touch points, so everything from your website to your social to SEO and paid search. You want to think about all of the paid media elements that you may be engaging in. Again, I would think about this in relation to both digital and traditional. You do want to take a look at your traditional channels overall, whether you are engaging there in a paid fashion or through anything organic. You want to think really fully about any service and logistics elements. So looking at your in-store sales representatives, your customer service call center, fulfillment and product delivery, any representative of your brand that may be interacting with or engaging with the customer in the digital realm or in the real world. You also want to think about live events like trade shows, conferences, festivals, sponsored events, thought leadership events as another component of the touch points that you may want to integrate into omni-channel. Obviously, if you are a retailer, you want to look at the physical retail environment. If you are a CPG brand or a brand that is sold within retail environments, you definitely want to think about in-store displays, in-store promotions, and anything that you may be able to integrate at point of sale. And then lastly, you want to look at the product itself. As you think about the packaging, the product experience, where can you start to integrate some of these omni-channel components as you think about the product itself. And then you want to start to look at how you think about the customer journey. And you really want to focus on what the customer might want to be able to do within each channel. And then also think about the types of functionality that you may want to allow. So there may be a really strategic reason that you don't want to enable mobile sales. Thinking through those components is really important at the onset. Next, you do want to go ahead and map out the consumer journey. And again, remember, in omni-channel, that may not be a straight line, and it may not be one journey. A consumer may actually take multiple journeys to get to your brand and to final conversion. You want to identify the decision points along that journey, and then create content to suit the different navigational decisions that a consumer may make as they're thinking about what type of information they may want or need next before deciding to purchase your product. You obviously want to take into account demographics and psychographics as you're thinking about these different journeys. And then you want to develop micro-segmentation using analytics and that combined data set that you're looking at now once you start to integrate teams, technologies, and your analytics capabilities. And speaking of integrated analytics, the way we want to start looking at this space is by mapping your current data capture systems and really understanding how all of those different touch points that we just looked at in the audit might be creating data and understanding where that data is currently going and who has access to it. Then you want to develop a new reporting structure for that data. So as you're looking at the touchpoint audit, a really important component of that is actually assigning ownership for those specific touch points, coming up with a process for escalating or distributing information that may come through one of those touch points, and then really making sure that that data is integrated on the back end. When you're looking at data integration, you need to make sure that you're standardizing data input guidelines to ensure that all data is recorded with the same level of detail and in real time. So again, this is a place where it's likely going to require the removal of certain silos or walls within your organization in order to connect the dots in a way that can really be utilized strategically. And then lastly, you want to make sure that you're using a single data system collection that can integrate data from both online and offline business areas. And you also, again, want to think about building this with both a scalability and flexibility so that it can integrate new data sources as those may come online in the future. And if you start to do this, what it allows you to do as a brand is really synchronize your channels, which is going to give you the ability to provide that really personalized service to consumers when they're purchasing your product. It will allow you to have really consistent messaging and a consistent brand experience across all channels and touch points. And it will allow you to keep track of your consumer across these multiple channels. So that is really tied to that idea of having a singular view of the consumer, regardless of which touch points they may choose to engage with you through. The next piece will really be defining your KPIs as you think about your omni-channel strategy. And again, the things that may be important as you look at performance metrics will really differ depending on your brand, the vertical you're in, and what exactly you're trying to learn. But the types of things you can expect to learn if you've set up your omni-channel strategy and analytics capturing correctly is the ability to look at customer feedback, really being able to track customer retention and recovery. Again, because you're able to get data across multiple channels. You'll want to look at, obviously, your social media analytics, customer satisfaction studies, but you'll also want to look at things like third-party rankings. As you start to implement omni-channel, what should be happening for your consumer is an elevated experience with your brand. And so it should start to affect those third-party ratings that you may look at as a broader indicator of brand health. It'll also give you that 360-degree view of the customer, which again becomes even more important as we start to integrate additional digital channels. And it may also be able to help you understand things like the reduction in customer service support costs. So how does having an omni-channel strategy that's really connecting the dots for the consumer help to reduce some of those other types of costs that, again, may not be directly within the realm of marketing, but are certainly connected as we look at the broader business infrastructure. So I wanted to finish off by sharing a few best-in-class examples that really showcase how different brands in very different categories are leveraging and thinking about omni-channel. And the first one I wanted to share is something that I actually experienced myself actually this year when I went to South by Southwest. So I was down there for one of my clients, and I was staying in an Airbnb. And when I got to my Airbnb, I took a picture because it was a really cute little apartment, and I posted it on Instagram. About 30 minutes later, I got a knock at the door. And when I opened the door, there was an Airbnb employee, and they handed me a package, and inside was everything that you're seeing on the screen right now. So you can see they had this amazing, really cool handwritten note that was personalized to me. And with that came this amazing swag bag, fully branded. It included a pack of custom cards that they had developed, a partnership with Aesop's for a couple of toiletries that they were able to share since they knew I was traveling, and then a really cool Polaroid camera, which you would think, why is Instagram, a digital photo app, giving me a physical camera that essentially would potentially stop me from using their product? And to me, it was a really interesting contextual tie-in to what the company is really about and focused on, which is allowing me to take pictures and then share them with my friends. But the truly amazing thing about this type of an execution is the amount of behind the scenes connectivity that had to happen across silos and departments. So just breaking it down and thinking about it logically, at a minimum, they had to have the team that is actually handling bookings and watching bookings happen, connect to their social media team, who is tracking social for any posts that people were making about South by Southwest. They had to integrate that data to know that I had booked a place in Austin, to know that I had posted about it on social, to have that physical address on hand, and to have an operational team on the ground that could actually deliver this package to me within a reasonable amount of time. So at a minimum, you're probably talking about 3 to 4 different departments within the broader organization that had to be really integrated in a real-time, seamless way in order to deliver this delight and surprise experience to me as the consumer. So a really interesting example of how Omni-Channel can be used, even when we're thinking about the hospitality industry and really thinking about creating that amazing experience for a consumer. The next example I want to share takes us into a completely different category and is a really interesting execution that Glade actually did last holiday season in New York City. And since they are a CPG brand in a category that's not particularly sexy or interesting, they decided to do something really experiential. And so what they stood up was something called the Museum of Feelings, which they were showcasing about 4 or 5 different scents throughout the exhibit. And each room was really focused on one of those scents. And so they had things like what you're seeing in the image on the screen. This was their kaleidoscope room, which used projections and light displays to really create a very emotional experience connected to one of the scents. They also had individual light halos, a room that had fragrance-scented clouds, a room that had a tangible forest of lights. So some really interesting concepts where they're playing with all 5 senses and integrating and infusing that scent into each of those experiences. When people stepped out of the experience itself, they went into a fully branded space where they could revisit and interact with the fragrances and different bespoke architectural elements. And then as a parting gift, the brand actually created something called the Mood Lens Selfie, where you took a picture and based on the biometrics that the camera was able to read, it colored your image with a certain color that was again connected to one of the scents. And then to extend this experience to people who might not be able to come to New York and experience it in person, they also created the Museum of Feelings online mood lens or a mobile mood lens, where again, it uses biometric sensors within the camera to allow you to take a selfie and add that mood-related color to the image. So another really interesting way that the brand was thinking about taking this singular experience and turning it into something that was much bigger and really engaging in an omni-channel fashion. And then the last example I want to share with you is from a designer called Rebecca Minkoff. If you're in the retail space and you haven't been following what she's been doing in her stores, I would highly recommend you just start keeping tabs on the things that she's starting to experiment with. And to share what she's doing, I'm actually going to show you a quick video that I think gives a really robust view of what omnichannel can be when it's executed using best practices. Oh, apologies. I think there we go.
One of the most fascinating things about watching our millennial consumer is she's grown up as a digital native. She uses her mobile device 150 times a day. In the store, the majority of them immediately pull up our app or pull up our mobile site. And then they start looking for that exact product to read about the ratings and reviews. And then they might see if it isn't in store, if we don't have it available here, they want to see, can they buy it from our site? For me, the new definition for luxury is being able to be empowered to select the service level that she wants, when she wants, on the device that she wants. It's all connected, which I think is where the magic really comes in. We started to incorporate some of the best things that we know in the online world to the offline world in our connected store. We can really look at how our consumers engaging with us, not only in our mobile app, also in the fitting room, and also on our website. We are using all of this data across our ecosystem to inform everything that we're doing and make it a better experience for our consumer. Maybe she's looking at a number of different dresses. Then maybe she goes to the store and she tries on 2 or 3 in her fitting room and she doesn't convert there, but that's why we have save your fitting room session to your phone. And then you can buy it directly from your mobile device, or you can call the store. As a result of all of this, we've seen a 6 to 7 time increase in our ready-to-wear sales in such a short period of time of 5 to 6 months. Technology is going to be able to do phenomenal things, but you need to figure out what's right for your consumer, what's right at that moment in the shopping journey, and what should you do for her.
So again, I think that is really one of the best examples of a brand that is doing omni-channel in the right way. And I want to make sure you guys caught that, but she said that they have seen a 6 to 7 times increase in their ready-to-wear sales in just 5 months. And the piece that I think is most interesting as we look at how they're actually executing is they're really starting to think about how to leverage some of those best practices that we've learned through e-commerce and mobile commerce, and starting to integrate them into physical retail in really interesting ways. For example, those interactive mirrors. And so even as we think about where the future of retail is going, it's really, really important that we start to think about it in an omni-channel fashion, because some of those best practices are things that we really need to be able to leverage and build on from all of our experience in the digital world, and conversely, what we know from traditional retail. How do we start to integrate that even more into what we're doing in digital? So I'll leave you with one final thought. There we go. One final thought, and this is really my mantra. Disruption is not a threat, it's an opportunity. And while omni-channel may be disrupting where retail is today, for brands that are willing to jump in and really start to experiment and leverage omni-channel, you can see that it has tangible impact on the business. But it does require a little bit of risk, and it does require thinking a little bit differently, not just about our marketing, but about our organizations holistically. So I want to just say thank you so much. Again, hopefully everyone has found this valuable and interesting. happy to answer some questions. I know we have a little bit more time. So Mark, I don't know, I'll hand it back over to you if we want to take a few questions from the group.
Well, sounds great. Thanks again, Nicola. If you can go ahead and stop sharing your screen, let's go ahead and have a conversation, take on a few of the questions. I think, first of all, I'd like to thank you, Nicola, for your partnership in this area and working closely with the GMDC Education Council to help deepen the insight programs that helps brands and retailers know how to remain relevant. I think in addition, I'm glad that I met you at the Denver Digital Summit just a few months ago, and you agreed to host an Infocast on our Connect platform so that our audience knows the message that Nicola was able to share with us today aligns perfectly against our insight mission to our members and helps our retailers advance their selling attributes and connect with shoppers in many new ways. We do have a few questions, so let's go ahead and get to those, Nicola. The first question that I have for one of our viewers, Nicola, how do you get started in Omni-Channel if this isn't something our brand is already doing?
Yeah, so again, I think the first step is starting to do that touch point audit. And first, just getting a sense of where consumers are actually engaging with or interacting with your brand. The next step is really getting leadership on board to understand that there is some investment required to start connecting the dots. I would imagine even if you're not doing any type of omni-channel marketing, I would imagine at this point as a brand, you're probably active in a number of channels. And so you can start really small, even if you can just start to connect 1 or 2 channels at a time. Again, if you're building this in a scalable, flexible way, it's something that you can continue to add to over time as you get buy-in from other channels and departments.
Nicola, outside of the marketing aspect, what other channels inside of my organization does Omni-Channel affect?
So it will definitely affect any team that is dealing with logistics or distribution. It will likely affect your operations team. It will more broadly affect your communications team as you think holistically about internal communications and information sharing. There's a component of Omni-Channel that requires a more robust approach to those components as well.
That's great. Thanks, Nicola. We are coming to the end of our session, and I do want to be sensitive to our time. We're a little bit early, but thanks again, Nicola. And for all of our viewers, I'm happy to share, and Nicola's happy to share more information about this Infocast, as well as our contact information as well. So thanks again.
Thank you.
If this is your first time experiencing a GMDC Infocast, I'd like to make sure that you're aware that this session and all previous Infocast events can be viewed on the Archive tab on gmdcconnect.org, along with a schedule to register for future Infocasts. I'd also like to encourage you to get involved with GMDC and become a member. Today's Infocast is just a small sample of what our members have access to. GMDC is a business ecosystem that helps you connect, collaborate, create, and enable commerce in both the general merchandise and the health, beauty, wellness industry. For more information, please contact me at markm@gmdc.org. And I'd love to help you find opportunities to get your company exposed to high-profile executives and decision makers. Thanks for joining us today. We hope the rest of your week is as productive as this last hour. Take care.